what's up?
Now just recording a podcast. What's up with you?
Oh, not too much. You know what, though?
What?
You need a counselor.
Thanks, so do you.
I do need a counselor. You're right. Welcome back to You Need a Counselor. I am Julie Johnson. I am the president and founder of Heart and Solutions. We are offering mental health counseling services here in Iowa in person in any of our 9 locations or over telehealth. In the schools also, which we'll get to talk about today, or on the phone too. And so specifically, we are offering in-office services and in-school services in the Grundy Center and Waterloo areas. So if you are in Iowa, this is the episode for you if you live in those areas.
And I'm Chrissa. I am the vice president at Heart and Solutions. So I am in charge of our behavioral health department, where we work with kids ages 4 to 18, either in home, in our office, or in schools, like Julie mentioned, or telehealth right now, on improving different behavioral skill goals that they set in their sessions with their families. And this is You Need a Counselor. So our podcast is designed for people curious about counseling but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
Yeah, so we post on Sunday nights. You will see a teaser trailer on Friday nights. So go ahead and let that be kind of a little taste of what that Sunday night episode is going to be. And then Sunday nights at 5 o'clock Central. So set your calendar or set your timer, batch up your laundry throughout the week, and go ahead and set a date. Go ahead and match up your socks and get all of your laundry put away. Start fresh for the week with fresh clothes. And also it gives you an entire week to call your counselor, to call today's guest, Sam, and get scheduled for an appointment. All right. So today we are very, very excited. We have one of our favorite people. I say our because Chrissa and I both. This is one of our favorite people. And so I'm going to brag on our guest a little bit. We've got Sam Galema here, and Sam is a fellow UNI counseling grad. So woohoo. And she is also, while she was at UNI, she was the co-coordinator of the Out of Darkness Suicide Prevention Walk for 2 years. Did a ton of advocacy work, did a ton of just community networking work out there to get the word about suicide prevention, and raised a ton of money for prevention activities as well. So we'll be really interested to hear about that. She also worked at the UNI Counseling Center while she was there at the program. And as somebody who's been in the program, I will tell you that UNI Counseling Center does not take just any of the graduate students to do counseling services there. Sam also has experience at Unity Point Mental Health Inpatient Unit, which inpatient work, oh my goodness, is very, very different than outpatient work. So I will be really, really excited to hear about that too. We actually haven't had anybody on the podcast who has had experience with inpatient work and can share perspective on that. So that'll be exciting too for the episode. Welcome, Sam. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I'm super excited. So
awesome. And Sam, for anybody who has watched our first season of episodes, Sam was our editor on this podcast. So I do have to shout out to Sam that the intro that you see, that all of the setup for the formatting of this podcast, this is the girl right here. So yeah. we are so excited for Sam to be joining us. And Sam currently does mental health therapy in our Grundy Center office and in our Waterloo office. She's also in several schools out here in this area. So if you are in this area, make sure you check out Sam for mental health counseling. Sam also was a BHIS counselor here at Heart and Solutions as well. And I always say too, that was the way that I started in the field, was doing BHIS. And oh my goodness, what a perspective BHIS gives you on this field and on mental health as well. So can you tell us a little bit about maybe doing BHIS and then kind of therapy and the transition there?
Yeah, I loved the BHIS job. It was definitely a very challenging thing, because anytime you're going into people's homes, there's a different bit of kind of vulnerability and openness there that is not always there with counseling, because you're in their space, you are in the nitty gritty. Like you're there when parents and kids get in their worst fights. You're there when kids are throwing their stuff everywhere because they're so angry because they have this freedom. And Be His was definitely, like you said, it was such an eye-opening experience that I loved doing Be His. It was actually great. Some of my Be His clients actually transitioned to therapy with me. So that was really exciting, and just like was able to continue that relationship there. But I started with Be His actually because I started the program for counseling, and I used to work at a daycare, which like I love the daycare. I've always loved working with kids, but I was kind of like, I need more experience. Like I feel very unaware of what this all entails, and then just randomly found the Be His job. And I remember the interview was actually with Chrissa and Julie, and we had to role play. And I remember like leaving and like calling my mom and being like, I've never done an interview like I don't know what that was. Like I was like, they were super nice and like they said it went well, but I honestly felt like I was like, I had no idea what was, because like I remember sitting in the waiting room being like, okay, like my strengths are you go over the typical, but like mental health is not a typical job. Mm-hmm. So it was like, I think that was really my first ever experience. Like the job interview for Be His was my first ever to be like, you have to be so adaptable and quick on your feet, especially in Be His, which is the in-home setting. And then transitioning to therapy was like kind of this big thing of always being ready to take whatever is next, and kind of going into your day to be like, okay, I have like this client, like these are kind of my goals. And then it's like also knowing like the second they're there, I'm like, you just throw it out the window, because like what they need that day is my main objective. So that I think is one thing that has stayed the same throughout the whole, like my experience with mental health. And then just as I continue to grow as a therapist, there's a different kind of hurdles, but also rewards and accomplishments that you really never expect with this job.
Absolutely. I love that kind of theme that you're talking about here, about how we have to be so adaptable as counselors in order to provide clients with the experience that what they need in that moment is what we are going to adapt to, that our clients don't have to adapt to us, that we are going to adapt to our clients. And I think for so many of us in our lives, we get so used to forming ourselves to fit the external expectations around us. We get so used to, what does this person need me to be? And what does this person need me to be? And what does this role need me to be? That to go into a counseling session and to hear Sam as a mental health counselor talking about how, as a counselor, she can have her entire day planned out and sessions planned out and know that that'll change in an instant. And adaptability is so key. And I think that the reason that adaptability is so key for you is because you are so focused on you are going to be the one to adapt for your clients. I love that. The interview, just so that everybody give a little bit of background on the interview. It's so funny because I remember your interview so well. And when I did my interview for Be His, I had no idea what this job even was. I knew that it was in the human services field. I knew that I wanted to help people, and I knew that I wanted to be a counselor. That was all that I knew. And what we do with our Be His applicants is we know that most people are not trained to do specifically Be His, right? So when we get a new therapist that comes in, we know that, okay, as soon as Sam graduated from UNI and got her license, we said, Sam has been trained to be a therapist, right? And so all we really need to train her on is how we do things organizationally, right? However, with Be His, with the in-home behavioral health skills portion, there really is not very much training, right?
Except there's nothing you can do to prepare for that job. Like, there's nothing, because there's like days where, there's not much training besides just making sure that they could handle it. So
absolutely. And so what we do in those interviews is we do a role play. And because we're not trying to gauge how much book knowledge does this person have about counseling, we're not trying to gauge, how well can this person talk about themselves and list their strengths. Sorry, Sam, we didn't care because we saw them. We saw your strengths come through in real time. You didn't have to tell us. We could see it because we did the role play, and we could identify those very, very quickly. Okay, she is adapting. She's figuring out what we as pretend clients need her to do in this session, and how to work with what we're presenting and still stay on task. And that is really the skill of being a BHIS counselor and being a counselor in general. I think you're just so identifying how well that translates into doing in-office therapy as well. So Sam, tell us a little bit about the Out of Darkness Suicide Prevention Walk.
It is, I cannot stress how important of an event it is. Like, it is hosted by our program every year here at UNI, but it is a nationwide thing. It is so important. Like, the main goal of it is just like any walk, to kind of raise money to fund research, education, all this stuff. But it's also, the money is kind of a secondary thing. Like, the goal is you want to create this space where people can come and talk about mental illness and talk about kind of this thing that you don't want to bring up anywhere else. And I started to get involved mainly just because my friends in the program were, and I was actually helping out a friend who was studying abroad, that he was like, can you do this while I'm gone? And then I just, like, the passion just grew so quickly, because I learned very quickly working with Out of the Darkness that there's not one person in the world that you could go to and say, I'm doing this thing with suicide, that doesn't immediately come back with, oh, I had a cousin who died of suicide. I had a friend. There's not a person out there that doesn't know someone who lost their life to suicide. And it was such a gateway of not only like to educate and raise funds, but just to make connections with a community that it's so hard to talk about these things. And more often than not, people feel like they almost have to grieve by themselves, when that's not the case at all. Like, we want to show that, like, this is a community, these are people, this is a place where you can come and work out those emotions, because suicide is considered an epidemic in our country, the numbers, the things like that. And it's such a concern, and so many people are affected by it, yet it's such a common spread issue, but people don't want to talk about it. So this walk is just, we wanted to make it this event of hope, this event of spreading kind of that there's a lot of people here that are not just going through the same pain that you are, but are also trying to build this hope to help reach more people. And I always love that quote where it's like, if you look for the darkness, that's all you'll ever see. But like, if you see the light, it continues to grow. So I feel like it's such an important event, because it's that first spark of light that people can go home and say, like, I got this bracelet, Out of the Darkness this is what it means. And it can kind of continue to grow and become bigger and bigger and bigger. So advocating for that event and kind of working on that event was very difficult at times. It was a demanding thing, but I would do it 100 times over. Like, I hope to keep doing it. I hope to eventually, like, more in my career, like wherever that takes me later in life, like, I want Out of the Darkness to be like a prevalent part in it, no matter where I go.
I love that. Wow. Yeah, because suicide is it's still a taboo topic. People don't want to talk about it, even though, like you said, everybody has somebody in their life that's been impacted. If it's not them, it's a first degree person. It's their friend, it's their family member that have been affected by a suicide. And it can be so isolating. And what you're doing here is shining a beacon and saying you're not alone, that there are other people who are grieving the same way, or there are other people who are feeling the same way. And there's this prevention aspect, but there's also this acceptance aspect that, hey, if you have lost somebody who has completed a suicide, you are not alone. You are still allowed to grieve. That still happened, even though it's not often talked about. So I think that is amazing work that you are doing. And you had to adapt that quite a bit in 2020 and create a lot of virtual awareness events.
Yeah, that was definitely one thing. It was very heartbreaking, to have it online, just because I think the power in that event is being able to see like, you can have that, and there's just certain conversations you can have in person that are easier than it is over Zoom. But it's one of those things that, like, just because we're in a pandemic, that doesn't mean that you can take a step back from that advocacy. Like it's in those times that's more prevalent than ever. So we did things like the chalking around town, so people could find it, reached out more virtually, trying to still get that message across and get people interested and able to learn and able to connect with resources, because that was another big thing is during this really difficult time, people were experiencing their lowest of lows, that if we could continue to spread this hope message and kind of this unity in all of this, it could help direct people to resources, completely free resources online that maybe they're not ready for counseling yet, but they can start to get these resources that are ready and available and that are kind of just waiting for them, that could potentially help them get to that next step of finding a counselor and getting kind of over that place where they feel stuck.
There are so many resources, and Out of the Darkness is such a great place for people to start. It's just such a great starting place because you are out there spreading awareness, and so people know the name. They know that this event is happening across the nation, and so they know who to reach out to. It's a place where they know that they can find somebody.
So Sam, part of our show is talking about like why people need counseling and benefit from counseling. Why do you think counseling is important for everyone?
I think counseling is so important for everyone because it's just something that it doesn't discriminate. Like you could be the most successful person in your field and mental health is still there. Like it doesn't discriminate any walk of life, any age, any culture, any ethnicity. It's there no matter what. And it was one of those things that I almost had to check myself too, because I was like, well, I'm a counselor. Like I need to help people, like I need to be there all the time. Like I hear a lot of people come to my office, or a lot of people I've worked with, even, coworkers here at our organization that like will tell me about really traumatic childhoods or really hard things. And then I kind of had to check myself to be like, I had a great childhood, like my parents are great. They're loving, like mom's my best friend, like dad is my hero. Yet I struggle so bad with high functioning anxiety or body dysmorphia. There's so many things I struggled with, which on textbook, like I should be happy. Like I should be totally fine. And it took me that little kind of going through the program and educating myself to be like, no, like I don't need something bad to happen to me to be able to value my mental health. And it's something that everyone is experiencing, that like we're almost looking for a reason to justify going to counseling when the only reason we need is that like we're alive and we're literally trying to navigate this crazy world. Like that's enough to go to counseling. And it took me being in the program, like becoming a counselor, to kind of realize, to be like, it's okay that nothing like bad has happened to me. Like I still am struggling, and like that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many of these, like, well, I only need a counselor if I'm not to that point. Or there's kind of this idea of like rock bottom also, like rock bottom. Somebody please write in and tell me where rock bottom came from, because I always thought it came from like AA, but as a 12-stepper, it didn't. So I don't know where rock bottom came from, but everybody uses this expression. And I think that it's so prevalent with the idea of going to counseling, because there are so many reasons why we think, well, I don't need it because I don't have a good enough reason. And I love what you're saying is that no, like my reason is my default, right? I need a reason not to go as opposed to needing a reason to go. And I think in our field, especially, and being high functioning, I think is like one of the most challenging things to mental health, because there are all of these issues where we say, oh, well, no, I mean, I'm working a good job, like I'm living a good life. I got a good family. I've got all of these things. Like, who am I to need help? Right? Like I'm the professional. I need to be there for everybody. Like who am I to ask for help? You are still a person. You are still a person. All of these other things are just the things, pieces of us, but we have a brain. Therefore, we deserve mental health care. Like we have a physical body, so we deserve physical medical care, right? And we have we should do a whole episode on that. But about needing, anyway, I won't get political. Okay. So, but we have a brain, right? So we deserve mental health care. We like as a default, right? We don't need a reason to need it. We kind of need a reason not to, and we do. We give ourselves all of these reasons.
Yeah, there's a quote that I love that was like, if you sprain your ankle, you don't wait for every bone in your body to break before going to the hospital. And I was like, yeah, like what is stopping me? Like this thing that's clearly painful and causing me discomfort. Like, why am I waiting for everything else to break before I'm willing to go and like be like, it's my ankle. Like,
I love that.
yeah. Like, and that's a big thing that I see with working with kids a lot of times is parents are like, this thing is kind of concerning, but I don't want it to be a long-term problem. And I'm like, exactly. Like talking about mental health openly and honestly early on is kind of the most important thing to help kids realize that like, it's okay when I get overwhelmed or like really upset if I can like kind of figure out like that I'm still the one in control and that like there's nothing wrong with me for having these basic human emotions and these completely healthy and normal reactions.
I love that because sometimes what we need a counselor for is to normalize the stuff about us that is completely normal. we need that normalization because we only know our own perspective. And so if from my own perspective something happens that's not my previous experience, I don't know if that's normal or not. I don't know if something is wrong with me or if I need to process this more. I have no idea. But being able to have somebody see it for what it is as we express it to them, and then for somebody to normalize that for us and say, this is okay. It is okay to have overwhelming emotions. That's okay. And there are things you can do with overwhelming emotions. You're not stuck with having them. You have them and you hear them and you express them, like you feel them and you express them, and that's okay. All of that is okay. And I love that prevention piece that you're talking about because there is this idea of I don't want this to be forever, right? I don't want this to be my entire life. And what you're saying is like, no, let's not get to that place. Let's not get to that place. Let's set these kids up for success now so that when they do have those challenges in their life, which it's not if they're going to have those challenges, it's when they're going to have those challenges in their life. And when they do, let's have them set up from the start.
It's funny because like being in this job, like you do like self-reflect a lot and it's such an important thing of checking yourself to be like, wow, like this is something that's really hard that I deal with. And I like kind of explore to be like, what would have happened if I would have challenged these thoughts like in my undergrad, in high school, like they're very, very ingrained. Like the paths in my brain are very ingrained to the point where like I have to check myself like every day, almost sometimes on the hour, and also be forgiving of myself to be like, just because you recognize these thoughts doesn't mean they're automatically going to go away. Like you have to put in the time and the work because I was I still am a very big, like, if I get to this point, things will be fine. Like in undergrad, I was like, if I graduate with my bachelor's, things will be fine. If I get accepted into grad school, it'll be fine. When I finish grad school, things will be fine. I won't be stressed. And now this is kind of the first time in my life where I was like, okay, there's not really a like, there's not really a next step. Like I'm in my profession, I'm at a full caseload, I'm working, and I'm still kind of feeling like a lot of negative self-talk, negative self-beliefs, and a lot of like stress that I'm just like, oh no, like I don't have this thing that I can keep putting it off because I don't have a foreseeable, it will get better when. So it kind of forced me to be like, okay, like it was never going to get better. That was just kind of a pacifying statement to get you to not give up, to not just like throw in the towel. So funny because it actually hit me editing these podcasts. And it was just so funny because I was editing and your guys' point was like, there's so many hours in a week, like you can have one of them and everything. And then in my head, I was like, well, I take hours for sleeping. And like, that's not your hour. Like, dude, so I'm just like, I was like, that's so true. Like, why am I not giving myself an hour to do this? Like, and one of the main motivators was I was like, going to counseling is going to make me a much better counselor.
Mm.
And I kind of checked myself because I was like, I noticed in my life when I set goals for myself, like based solely on myself, I will fail 9 times out of 10. But it's when I set those goals, you know, with my friends, because I won't give up on my friends. I'm not going to give up on my clients.
Mm.
So even though I kind of went with the idea of I need to go to counseling because it's going to make me a better counselor, like I'm not going to give up on my clients. So like it got me there. And I understand like that's not always the best way to look at it, but who am I to say it's not, you know, like it got me there. It got me to that step. So maybe it isn't the best way to approach my whole life, but like that's why I went to counseling, because I don't want that to be how I want it to be like I'm worth it to accomplish these goals just for me, but I'm not there yet, and that's okay because I'm working on getting there. So that was a big
Absolutely.
thing.
Oh my gosh, Sam, I love that so much. What I love about that is this is permission for anybody who's like, fine, I'll go to counseling because my mom wants me to. Fine, I'll go to counseling because my partner thinks that, like, even if you're going, fine, I'll do it because that's okay. That is okay. You're giving voice to, I think, this internal voice that a lot of us have, and saying it out loud, and even for me, hearing it from your voice, I'm going, oh my gosh, she's saying out loud, right? What's in so many of our heads, which is that, hey, oh my gosh, am I allowed to say, oh, I'm going because it's for them, right? But am I going to go for myself, and am I allowed to do that, and am I not allowed to do that, right? All of these internal thoughts. And then I love when you stop and you take a breath and you just said, but it's okay. Like, it's okay. And no matter where you are, sometimes we hear people say, you know, well, after this happens, then I'll go to counseling, right? Because then I'll be in a better place to go. Like, then I'll be going just for me, right? And then I won't be going for my clients or to be a better, you know, whatever. No, whatever gets us there. It's whatever gets us there, and it's whatever gets us to help. And you've identified about yourself that, hey, for me to get things done and to do things, I do them for other people, right? You've identified that, and you're using that to benefit not only them but to benefit yourself. It's just amazing. And I mean, what a freeing statement. And for anybody to hear this, what a freeing statement to know that Sam is a very successful counselor, and she goes through these things. Right. And so if you're listening to this and you go through these things, if that inner monologue was like, oh my gosh, how did she just read what is scrolling through my head, right? 9 times out of 10, it's because we all do. It doesn't, mental health does not care. It does not care. It doesn't care at all about anything, right? We all have it. We all need it. Sam, can you talk a little bit about, so you described it as high functioning anxiety, right? Can you describe that a little bit more? Because I think some people probably heard that and went, oh my gosh, what is that? Because I have it.
So the way like I kind of describe high function, and I mean, you can always look up like the very medical smart way to say it. The way I describe it is simply like, it is almost a hindersome constant thoughts of like, you're not doing enough, you're not trying hard enough. People see you as like a fraud. People like, you know, you're like, you are not coming off like you know anything. It's essentially this anxiety that is always pushing people to improve, to do better, to constantly keep going, and essentially wanting to be like the top. And like, I'm a very competitive person. I will own that. Like, in everything I do, like I like to be number one, but that's just like, and that's something that is both harmful and, you know, we can get into that. But it's the same with anxiety, where it's like this high functioning anxiety is always met with like, you're kind of pushing yourself to do better with but these thoughts of like, you're not lovable if you are not the best. You are not worth it if you aren't able to do X, Y, and Z. And I try to normalize that a lot with my clients, because like anxiety is not always bad. Like anxiety is what gets us to appointments on time. It what gets us to study for our exams, to do, you know, like we don't want to get rid of all of our anxiety, but there's almost this spectrum. And I would say high functioning anxiety is like, it's at that spectrum where you can still have a job, have really good relationships in your life. Everything on the outside seems seemingly perfect, like how everyone measures success. But in your brain, it's still not enough and it's still not good enough.
Mhm.
And it's kind of this thought of everyone sees you as like a fraud a little bit, almost like that's what this anxiety piece is. You have to keep proving yourself.
Mhm.
And that was, yeah, like that's something that I have struggled with my whole life. And it wasn't until like later in my life that I was kind of like, oh, like that's not a good way to see things, you know, like I shouldn't see like love is like a contingent on certain things or my worth contingent on certain things. Like, and being able to kind of name it as like this high functioning anxiety is done huge, because I tell that a lot of my clients too, like it's really hard to fight a monster that like has no name and no face.
Mhm.
So a big thing in counseling is like I really work on like how can we simply just like name these emotions you're feeling, because I'm sure everyone's had those like where you come in and you're overwhelmed and you're just like I just am, it's just not right. So being able to name it for me was like kind of that first step of taking it like my power back and being like, okay, like I have anxiety, but I'm not I'm not anxious. Like I am separate from this part of me.
I love that. I think that sometimes there's this idea of anxiety as a hindrance, right? And a lot of times it is for so many people. Anxiety is very hindering, right? Anxiety is what makes us late for the appointment, right? Sometimes, but I think that is the general idea that that society has when we think about anxiety. And what you're giving voice to is what so many people are experiencing, where they say, I don't have that kind of anxiety. So what is it? What's wrong with me? Like, why do I feel this way about myself? Why do I feel this way about my world? Why is nothing that I accomplish ever feel good enough to me? Like, why can't I feel proud of myself ever? And then to say, well, maybe it's anxiety, and then have the thought of like, well, no, because if I had anxiety then, right, then I wouldn't have been able to get into grad school, then I wouldn't have been able to do all of these things. And what you're giving voice to is, it doesn't mean you don't have anxiety. And and I think that sometimes our resume, right, how we look on paper, you said it earlier, we look great on paper, right? And I've said that to Joe so many times. I've said, I look good on paper. It's that same feeling of like, can I as a human measure up to what I expect of myself, what I think that others expect of me, right? And that next achievement. And the answer is like, no. As a human being, as a human being, we can't ever hit that 100% perfect all the time. We can't always be number one. We literally cannot do it. And the idea of that, the idea that we can't do it is like, oh my gosh, well then what can I put my hope in? Like, honestly, what can I put my hope in if I can't be number one, if I can't be the best at everything that I do, if everybody isn't going to see me as super achieving all the time? And I love that you're giving this monster a name, because it is anxiety and it doesn't sound like anxiety. So when we describe it to other people, they might go, well, but you're fine. Like, you're doing great. You've got a great partner. You've got a great family. You've got a great whatever. And the truth is, we're not fine. And it's okay that we're not fine. It's okay not to be fine. Everybody needs help. It's just, I love that you're giving voice to this, that you're giving a name to this, because there are so many people who really, really could benefit from support in this area, but they don't know what to call it, because they're like, but it's not anxiety. But it is. It is anxiety.
And it's really frustrating because, like you said, it's like when you describe it, if you kind of describe it, more so of like not sharing the more harmful or like the hurtful thoughts, you share and people are like, sounds like you just have like a really good work ethic. And, like it's so easily for people to kind of put on these rose colored glasses and be like, it sounds like it got you where you are today. And like, it's really good. And I'm like, yeah, like I'm not denying it's definitely played a role in like getting me to where I am, but like it also is like a huge hindrance, like kind of this weight to carry around that it's not my work ethic. It's almost something that is hindering me becoming like everything that I want to be. And I kind of stress that a lot to be like, as a counselor, I have a lot of people, and I'm sure you guys have both been met with this too. You have a lot of people being like, well, what is that emotion? Like, what is this? And like, I don't have a right to say, because I don't know exactly how you're experiencing it. And I don't know exactly how it feels for you. I have ideas in my mind of emotions that it works for me. But a lot of times, especially in working with kids, I'll say sometimes our brains speak a different language than us. And it's kind of like, have you ever spoken to someone without who doesn't speak the same language? You do a lot of hand motions, you do a lot of over the top gestures. So I'm like, our emotions are signals from our brain trying to tell us what we need. And sometimes it's really frustrating to try to translate that message because we can't understand what it's saying. And I think for a long time, I translated this high functioning anxiety as I work really hard, I'm selfless, like all these things that seemingly are so good, because I was just translating it. I wasn't really listening to the full picture. I was kind of just taking it with what I wanted to hear. So a big part of that was kind of accepting to being like, it's okay for me to say no to things if I feel tired. And like, for example, like editing this podcast was super, like it was something I really enjoy. It's like definitely a hobby. Like I love working with computers and videos, and Julie kind of approached me with it when I was waiting for my license to come in. So I had a ton of free time. I was wrapping up my last BHIS clients. I had a ton of time where I could edit, every day, every night. Well, then all of a sudden my license got in, and I think it took me like 2.5 weeks to have a full caseload. So it literally went night and day from having all the time in the world to almost being so overwhelmed. And Julie reached out and was like, hey, like, let's talk about this editing and everything. And that was kind of the first time, well, not the first time, but one of the very first times that I felt like I was able to kind of challenge and be like, okay, like Julie and Chris are not going to not like me anymore because I stopped editing this podcast. Like they're not gonna see me as lazy. They're not gonna see me as like someone who's letting them down. And it was like very freeing to kind of have that conversation, to be like, I would love to keep doing this, but like it's just not really an option for me right now. And then it was so funny because in your head, like my high functioning anxiety was like, they're gonna be annoyed, they're gonna think all this stuff. And it was literally just met with like, totally fine. That's all right. So it's like and then I think about it, like how many times does that happen with my anxiety, where I think me being honest with people is going to cause them to not like me anymore, or to cause like me to be viewed differently, when in reality it's fine. Like it's okay.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? I love that. I love that. I mean, Sam, I gotta say, it takes one to know one. So I know. So, I mean, those conversations are so stressful, right? Like that inner monologue. And I love how you give voice to that inner monologue. I just love it. As I'm listening to you, as I'm hearing you say, like, these thoughts came in of like, they're not going to like me anymore. They're going to think that I'm horrible. They're going to think that I'm not, that I don't care about it, or that I didn't like it, or that I don't like them. We do create it, but it causes us pain. Like, this is what I think doesn't get talked about enough in terms of high functioning anxiety, is that there is so much pain involved with every little decision that we make. There's so much pain involved. And like you said, it's pain that is not, it's almost like we're not allowed to express that pain. Because if we were to express that pain, it sounds like it shouldn't be a problem, right? It's like, oh, I'm so pained by, the fact that I have a master's degree, and I'm so pained by the fact that I have so many talents that I can't keep them all contained. and we hear that and we go, oh my gosh, right? Like I can't. And the thing is that nobody's talking about the fact that that is a painful situation to be in. It is painful to have those thoughts constantly in our heads telling us that we are not good enough, that we need to say yes to everything and everybody, that we need to be everything to every person, where we won't be accepted, or we won't be loved, or we won't be worthwhile, and that our worth is attached to our accomplishments. So there's the term like materialistic, right? And I don't know that there is a comparative word for what we're talking about. But so if I think materialistic, I think this is a person who attaches their worth to the material things that they have, right? If my watch is more expensive, I'm worth more. If my house is bigger, I'm worth more than if my house is smaller or my watch is less expensive, right? This is a materialistic viewpoint. I think the word materialistic has become very like negative and judgmental, but honestly, there's pain with that. That's a painful state to be in because you can't have enough material, right, to feel worthwhile. And this is the same thing, but instead of my watch is this expensive, this is my accomplishments are this expensive. I have this many letters after my name. I have this many notches on my belt, right? I get this many gold stars at the end of the week. And I don't know, can you guys think, is there one? If you're listening to this, write into us, let us know, because this is a phenomenon, I think, that is affecting so many people. So many people are suffering with this. This idea of our worth is attached to our achievements. And in this country and in this culture, we had Vicky Hui on the podcast, who Sam knows. We had her on the other day. And in Malaysian culture, we talked about how there's so much more collectivism, right? We're all kind of individual accomplishment is really not valued as highly as it is here in the United States. While some of these thoughts have been helpful to us in some ways in our lives, I think that the parts that have been helpful allow us an excuse to keep them, right? They allow us that wiggle room and that justification to keep these things that are on their other side not at all helpful to us. It reminds me of hoarders, right? Okay, so Joe was exposed to somebody who was exposed to COVID, or tested positive for COVID, like in November. And so Monica and I went to a hotel for a couple of days, and they had hoarders. We don't have cable at home, so I was super excited.
It's on Hulu right now.
Is it? I don't have Hulu. I need to get it. Anyway, so this guy they were cleaning out his house, and he had they brought out these Mountain Dew bottles, and they were expired. And he said, no, but I can feed animals with that. And the thing is that Mountain Dew bottle was causing him so much pain, right? Having all of those things in his house was causing him so much pain in his relationships, in his life. But that amount of good that it was doing for him, which was, well, I could feed animals with that, was giving him what he needed to keep that and hold on to the thing that was giving him pain. And what I love about your story is you said, yeah, there are aspects of this that have been helpful to me. That doesn't mean I need to keep them if they're not helpful to me now, if they're causing me pain now, or if they've been causing me pain. I can still achieve the things that I have achieved without the things that have caused me pain. And I love that idea. I think that more people need to hear that. I love that. So have you ever met anyone who was on the fence about counseling? Or if you were to meet somebody who was on the fence about counseling, what would you tell them? What would you want them to know about starting counseling?
I think the biggest thing about that is I have met quite a few people who are on the verge of being like, it's an interesting thought, but it just doesn't seem like it's for me. I would challenge those people to be like, what about it isn't for you? Like having someone to listen, like that just listens to you and is just kind of there. Like, it's kind of like, is it that trust aspect? Is it that vulnerability aspect? Like, what about it isn't for you? And then what can we challenge? Like, is that really a realistic thing? Like, what is it that's kind of stopping us from going? Is it that fear of being judged by others or things like that? Because I've met a few people, even worked with a few people that, will kind of be like, I don't want to call you counselor. Like, can I call you coach? And I'm just like, yeah, like you can, like, kind of understanding that in no way is that counselor anyone who's there to judge you, to do, like I said at the very beginning, at the very most, like, it's just going to be one more person in your life that's rooting for you. And I tell that a lot with like parents that come and I'm like, and because they're like, I don't know if my kid needs this. Like, I don't know what my goal is here. And I'm like, at the very least, you're adding one more person that cares about your child into their life. And I tell that to a lot of people who are on the fence, like, let's look bare minimum. You're adding someone who wants what's best for you, who's going to encourage and support that and push for that. So that's like my main thing that I tell everyone, that like counseling is scary. Like it's vulnerable. Like when I went into counseling, like it was really hard. And it was even harder because I went in and she's like, you're a counselor. Like we have your name down as a referral. And I was like, oh, like, oh, like, you know, like I was kind of like, oh no, you're going to watch me cry for an hour. Like, you know, but I had this thinking at the very least, like it's just one more person that like is listening, you know, like, and that was enough. Like I didn't really need someone to fix me or add anything into my life. I just needed someone to listen. And that's what it is it's someone that is just one more person to give you what, like maybe a step up in an area that could be lacking.
I love that. If it doesn't fit you, because it doesn't have to fix you. If at the very, very least, it's adding one more person to your life that wants the best for you, that want and is going to listen to what that means to you. Because we all have lots of people in our lives who want what's best for us. Yeah. But maybe it's their idea of what's best for us. And this is a person, like you're saying, that is going to listen to what we have to say and wants that best for us, wants our best for us. I love that.
It's an interesting dynamic too, because I tell my clients too, where I'm like, I want you to come into this hour every week and I want you to be as selfish as you can. Like, I want you to take like not, you know, because like there'll be times where they'll ask about me and I'm just like, no, like I would love to, you know, because it's like always that hard thing where I'm like, we would be friends. We would be such good friends. And like, I would love to do all these things, but like, I want this hour to be 100% about you. I want it to be about everything you want to talk about. I want it to be, I don't want to take up any of your mental capacity with telling you about like my dog. Like, yeah, he's adorable and he's perfect, but like, it's still like be 100% as selfish as you need to be, because there's not going to be another place in your life where you get to be selfish.
Yes.
You get to come in and 100% say, I need this. And like, I am so done with this and I'm frustrated with this. Like, this is the only kind of space in your life where that's possible. So just like being able to come in and almost have that freedom, this can be just whatever I need it to be, is like, I think one of the best and most overlooked things about counseling.
That is amazing. Permission to be selfish for an hour. When do we get to do that? We never get to do that. That's amazing, Sam. I love that. Oh my gosh. So, Sam, thank you so much for being here and for sharing all of this information with us. It's very, very inspiring. And I think so many people need to hear your story because I think it's something that we don't always have the words to express. And I think you've just expressed it so beautifully here today.
I'm Sam Galema and I 100% need a counselor.
Yeah, you do. So do we. Love it. All right. So if you live in Iowa, if you are in Grundy Center, or if you are in Waterloo, give us a call and get connected with Sam. Our number is 800-531-4236. Give us a call. Sam is available in office. She does in-school work as well. And she also does over the phone and over the computer.
And like Julie mentioned at the beginning, we do post every Sunday at 5 Central Time. So make sure you save up your laundry throughout the week or your chores so you can do that while you're listening to us on Sundays. And we can help prepare you to call a counselor for yourself on Monday morning.
Love it. Also, if you have if you're listening to this and you have questions for Sam, send them to us on Facebook Messenger. You Need a Counselor podcast. You can also send those, DM those to us on Instagram at You Need a Counselor podcast as well. We really hope to have Sam back on the show. And if you send us questions for Sam, we will go ahead and ask her to answer them the next time she's on the show.
Yeah, we didn't even get into like the inpatient stuff that we talked about. So we have so much more to talk about.
have
about.
so much more to talk about. I feel like we could have filled like 10 episodes here.
Okay, well, I'm Chrissa Brown.
And I'm Julie Johnson, and we need a counselor.
And so do you.
Bye.
Bye.